It's Dr. Rowe here. Greetings to everybody, all of you budding property investors, or those of you that have already got properties or moving into the HMO market. I'm just actually here in Denmark charging up my car. For those of you that are interested, this is what it looks like on a Tesla when you're charging it up. So I've been here for about 35, 40 minutes, put 100 and... Oh, actually, no. How much have I put on now? Put 289 kilometers on the charge. It's got about 35 minutes till I get full. I don't need to be full. I'll be peeling off in a bit. But I just thought I'd just tackle this very brief subject. It's going to be about 5 minutes. It's more of an experience, a learning lesson over the years. Those of you that are brand new to property, maybe moving into the buy-to-let market, this is less important, although you can be aware of it. Typically over the Christmas period, whether you own buy-to-let property or you own a HMO property, more so with buy-to-let HMOs, less so with buy-to-lets. With buy-to-lets, typically people are living in the home as a home. So ordinarily what will happen is they will stay in the house, the family will come to visit the property, they'll have friends and everybody else come and visit, so they'll typically be there. And for probably 2.5 to 3 years, when I started my portfolio back in 2001, everything we had was buy-to-let properties. So we started buying low-value properties. First ones we bought, well, actually the very first one we bought was in Oxfordshire, and then we went through the property training with the Asset Academy. And when we went through the training, one of the things we realized is we were buying properties, our mind was buying properties in the south. So our first one was in Oxford. We were saving up our money for the next one in the same area. And it wasn't until we actually went through that training and then went on to do the mentoring, we realized actually we can own properties all over the country in cheaper areas. So as an example, we started buying in South Wales. That was one of our areas. We actually bought in South Wales and in Lancashire. I think we ended up buying about 20 in South Wales and 25 to 30 in the Lancashire area. These were properties that were around the purchase price at the time of about £35,000. And we notched up 35, 40 properties in our first year, and then added to that, built out 60, 70, 80 properties, etc. But in that first period, everything we bought were typically buy-to-lets. I actually had some asylum seeker properties in those first 4 or 5 years, which were quite hands-off, and we had some social housing strategies that we put in place quite early. So those of you that are still new to this, don't worry, these type of strategies will start to come into play, and you'll learn more about these. So with the buy-to-let properties, we tended not to really have to think too much about the tenants over the Christmas period, apart from maybe giving them Christmas cards, wishing them well, sending a card through our letting agents, those sorts of things, because they're staying in the properties. But it wasn't until about 2.5 to 3 years in that we started to buy houses of multiple occupation. Now, for those of you watching this right now, this is a great strategy, and it's a lot quicker to get into than it was for us. And also the demand is so much higher than it was back then. Remember, we're talking nearly 20 years ago now. So the demand for HMOs has gone up massively. And the result of that is that there are obviously more HMO properties, but there's more landlords coming into the market to do HMOs. And what I noticed in my first year or two as a HMO landlord was that these are people that are living, they're single people, they're possibly couples, maybe people that have gone through divorce, possibly people that are settling in the country, not in a position to buy properties for themselves, usually on their own, and usually living away in a town away from somewhere else. Hi Nishma, nice to see you, by the way. And so at Christmas time, they go back to their families. You don't normally get somebody living in a single room in a HMO or a double room in a HMO, having the whole family suddenly arrive and sleep with them at the house. It can happen, they'll come and visit, but they typically won't come and stay there. So what I found with my HMOs was that the tenants were leaving the house to go to visit their family. Same thing with student lets, by the way, as well. Now, if you've got properties already, be mindful of this, because what I started to notice was little things like windows that had been left open. It's not a major thing, but it's kind of annoying through the winter months. The central heating system, back in the early days, we didn't have the smart metering system that we have today. We didn't have the Hive type systems where you have some control over it. So what I'm trying to say is be mindful of, and the easiest way to do this is 2 ways to do it. You can either send your tenants a Christmas card and say, this is the landlord here wishing you an amazing Christmas. Have a great time. You might even want to treat them to something. It's entirely up to you. But could I ask you just kindly to remember when you leave the house to keep the windows closed and to make sure the central heating is set down to a low. Not necessarily off, because again, this only happened once for me, but years and years ago. I lived in Herefordshire back in those days. We had one of the coldest, well, 2 years in a row actually, one of the coldest winters in history. I remember where I lived in the valley that we were living in, it was like -15. And one of our properties, one of the HMOs, I think it was a student let, the students had gone off and they turned all the heating off. And of course, the downside to that is if you don't have a nominal heating in your HMO, the pipes can freeze. Not always, but in this example, we had a situation like that. So I'm just warning you some of the things that can happen. Whereas if you've got a buy-to-let, the family are living there, typically that doesn't happen. So one example is send them a Christmas card, a general card to the whole group, or you can do it individually, but it's just a nice reminder to say, please, if you could, when you're away, drop the temperature really low, make sure the windows are all closed and all running water is switched off. Because again, these are little things that people forget. They rush out the house and they've left the tap running, tiny things like that. And remember, unlike a family let where they might be staying there over Christmas, with a HMO, it might be empty for a while. And I would recommend you have some sort of safety light, security light, or something that's on whilst they're away. Now, whether you want to pay to have one of those put in, and it's basically one of these timed lights that go on and off, or you have one particular light, they should all be low energy lights anyway, but you maybe ask them to leave a landing light on or something like that as well. So a couple of things just to remind you, write to them, ask them if they could just make sure the heating is left on nominal, not blasting, by the way, or if you've got a Hive system in there, even better, you can control it from your end remotely through the Wi-Fi system. 2, can they make sure they've checked that taps are switched off, locked down, things like that. Doors are locked, windows are closed, simple things like this. It is ultimately their responsibility, but when something happens, or if it gets cold, or if the heating, it's easy if you just remind them. So maybe even have a checklist for them. Alternatively, ask the letting agent if they would be prepared to do that on your behalf, whether they could go around and just remind the tenants or drop a letter to the tenants. A lot of letting agents probably wouldn't do this naturally, so you might need to remind them, or you could potentially send cards in a big envelope, one for each tenant, or just one big card, and ask the letting agent to drop it off, possibly even with a bottle of wine or something like that, or a small gesture, just as a way of standing out in front of your tenant. So that was it really. It's the main tip for the winter months. It can be, it can be for a brand new landlord running a 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 bedroom property, can be a little bit daunting when you first start out. But what I would say is just make sure that it's a bit like a mini hotel. Treat the tenants with respect, give them some reminders, find out when they typically are going to be out. That's something to be aware of. Maybe your letting agent can just check in as you go into the new year. But the key thing here is, the heating. I wouldn't want it off completely because you want to keep it, minimum temperature for freezing. Windows, doors, security, and the heating, as I've mentioned already. All right, that was it. I'm going to sign out. I'll speak to you all soon. Have a great Christmas. I'll probably send another message out onto the group before that anyway.